everyone, my name is Lauren Chase and I am Orange County Coastkeeper's staff attorney and I will be moderating our governance panel today. Thank you all so much for coming. This is a super exciting day that we've been planning for months and we're thrilled to have all of y'all here. We have an amazing lineup of panelists here for you today with great information to cover. So we're going to hop to it and get going because we've got lots of information to cover in just a little bit of time. So I'll ask each of my panelists to introduce themselves and give a short introduction presentation if they have one in about 10 minutes, hopefully, so we have some time for moderated questions after. So Ms. Crowe, would you like to get us started?
Sure. Good morning. Miha, and good morning to my fellow presenters and everyone that's here, not only in person, but virtually as well. My name is Gabrielle Crowe. I'm the Vice Chair for the Gabrielino-Shoshone Tribal Council of Southern California. I'm also an environmental educator, which I said hello to Dan Stetson. I used to work at the Ocean Institute for a long period of time. I'm here this morning to actually talk about some differences in government between tribal governments and state government and federal government. Also, just some issues that are facing us today, contemporary issues that are facing our tribes. So I have a small presentation, if they can put that.
So the next slide, if you will.
There we go. So my hope today is to kind of start a dialogue between different agencies to lead us on a path towards healing. Obviously, there's a lot of different things that have happened on these ancestral lands that were my ancestral lands. And I feel like talking with these different agencies and different people like who are here today can actually help us like go towards that step towards healing. You can go 2 slides from here.
You have a remote.
Oh, okay, there we go. I've never actually used one of these before. There you go. So this right here is actually a mural of my grandmother. This is Vera Rocha. She was the chief of our tribe prior to her passing in 2002. This is a mural that's actually in San Pedro. And she's actually holding a bundle of sage. She started the Spirited Sage Council years ago, so it's part of my discussion as well. So it's kind of difficult for you to see that from right here, but just talking about different types of sovereign government. So federal government basically is a government that gets its power from the people. State government gets its sovereign power from the federal government. And a tribal government is actually unique in the fact that it gets all of its power from not only the tribal members, but also just their connection to the land itself. So there's a little bit different in that. Some of the differences between some Southern California tribes is we actually, the Gabrielino-Shoshone tribe, my tribe specifically, we lack federal recognition. So what that means for us is we actually don't have a lot of the benefits and assistance that a lot of different tribes do. We also don't have reservations, which is a lot of things that people normally think. Native American people, you get to a certain age, you get your certain amount of money, you live in a reservation. We are actually, in Los Angeles, the largest urbanized population of Native Americans in the entire United States. So what that means for us is since we don't have reservations, we don't have land, we also just go and we have to work regular jobs. You know, we go to college, we do different things, and we live normal lives, but all these different things that like presentations like today and working with these different agencies are mostly done through tribal governments and mostly on a volunteer basis. So if that means for us, there's a lot of resources that we lack in comparison to different state and other agencies, and so that's just one of the things that I wanted to highlight. So at many times, it seems difficult. Different presentations that I've even given to different students, their main thing is, we didn't think any of you even existed anymore in California. And so that's also a big topic discussion that we are still here, we're still fighting for the things that have happened and trying to right a lot of wrongs that have happened in the past, so. Oh, did I go back too far? Okay, so, just in further discussion, this is actually a film that's premiering tomorrow on Earth Day, and it's a documentary that my tribal council was part of, and it's the whole idea between the line that's being crossed between appreciation and appropriation. White sage is actually a plant that's sacred to our culture, but at the same time, it's featured in movies and TV and different things, and people use it to smudge. And part of the problem with that is they over-harvest the plant, and that plant actually only exists in Southern California and into Baja. So we're trying to create some legislation to actually protect it, but it's also getting the word out there, because I think for the most part, a lot of times people don't know that it's a major issue for our tribe and for other California tribes. So this is a picture from the North Etowanda Preserve, which, as you can see, it said there's 400 pounds of white sage that were illegally harvested there in 2018. So what that means is there's people that just go over and poach, and the problem is with that, they don't necessarily use it for the right purpose. They'll use it and bundle it up, and then that's when you see it on Amazon or through different retailers. So that's what we're trying to get the point across, is that it's taken away, and once it gets to the point where there's nothing left, then there's going to be nothing left. And we want to try and get to that point where it's stopped before it gets there. So I'm here today just to make sure that people know that we're still here. So much of our ancestral lands were taken away, and obviously we can't go back in the past and fix those things, but we can be working together with different Indigenous leaders and Indigenous tribal members to actually work with these different agencies to figure out how we can kind of live back in harmony with the lands again. And so just an example, this is an article from an article talking about the oil spill that happened in October. And it says the recent oil spill in these tribal homelands makes it clear that at the time of ending offshore drilling and extractive industries, and it's time to rematriate and restore tribal lands and waters, and that's now. So I'm just saying to seek out Indigenous wisdom and integrate that knowledge into your solutions. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Crowe. Ms. Lucchesi, you're next.
Yes.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jennifer Lucchesi. I'm the Executive Officer of the California State Lands Commission. It's wonderful to be with you all this morning and for the rest of the day today. Here we go. I will be talking about the governance over the offshore oil and gas leases and the associated pipelines within state waters, with a little touch on our interaction with other regulatory agencies and the federal government, which hopefully will lead into a transition to Theresa and to Chris's presentations. So I'll start with some broad overview about the state's legal and policy framework that governs the offshore operations. The state's offshore oil and gas leasing history is complex and nuanced, and to state the obvious, energy policies from the 1950s and 60s are very different here in California from California's values and principles and our policy priorities of today. However, these decades-old energy policies are what created the legal, contractual, and constitutional framework that dictates the complexity of these offshore oil and gas leases, and will inform our conversation, our deliberation on how to advance our clean energy goals, our just transition objectives, and our marine environmental protection efforts. It's complex, but it's not impossible to address. As background, the Commission manages the state's sovereign public trust lands, which include over 120 rivers, 40 lakes, and lands along the 1,100 miles of coastline underlying the Pacific Ocean out to the 3-mile state-federal boundary. The Commission also exercises oversight authority over the state's public lands that have been granted to local jurisdictions in trust. These are about 80 local governments up and down the coast, including the offshore Long Beach oil operations operated and managed by the City of Long Beach. While the Commission has some regulatory functions, it is principally a land and resource management agency, not a regulatory agency. So we are very similar to the Federal Bureau of Ocean and Energy Management, or BOEM, the Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement, BSEE, offshore, and then the Bureau of Land Management onshore. For those oil and gas offshore facilities and pipelines located exclusively in state waters, the existing infrastructure is managed pursuant to a lease from the Commission or the local government. Specifically, pipelines that are located within state boundaries, including state waters, are called interstate pipelines, and they are regulated by the state fire marshal. Those pipelines that cross state waters, connecting federal waters through state waters to the onshore facilities, are called interstate pipelines, and those are managed by the federal government through and regulated by the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration. The Commission, State Fire Marshal, PHMSA, CalGEM, who's the oil and gas regulator of the state, and BSEE all work together collaboratively through an MOU to regulate and manage the protection of offshore waters as it relates to these pipelines. The MOA assures a coordinated analytical framework for regulation, implementation, and compliance. So taking a step back, in 1921, the legislature created the first Tidelands oil and gas leasing program. The existing offshore leases the Commission is responsible for managing were issued over a 30-year period between 1938 and 1968. In 1955, the legislature passed the Cunningham Shell Act, which serves as the foundational law for the existing oil and gas leases the Commission currently manages. Importantly, this act required the Commission to issue oil and gas leases for a term not based on the number of years, but for so long as oil and gas is produced in paying quantities. Essentially, this means that a lessee can produce oil and gas pursuant to their state lease indefinitely, as long as it is economic for them to do so. This specific term is included in all the remaining 11 actively producing offshore leases the Commission currently manages. These leases were entered into over 50 years ago and prior to the 1994 Coastal Sanctuary Act. Through the Sanctuary Act, the legislature has placed the entirety of California's coastline off limits to new oil and gas leases, but the current existing leases still remain and are managed by our Commission. As you already know, especially over the last 6 months with the Amplify spill, the Lempert-Keene Sea Strand Oil Spill Prevention and Response Act was passed in 1991. This act gave the Commission additional tools to prevent oil spills at the state's offshore platforms and islands through monthly and annual inspections and comprehensive safety audits conducted on all offshore platforms and islands every 5 years. And more recently, there have been a number of laws that have passed that prohibit the Commission from issuing leases for new infrastructure like pipelines that would facilitate new oil and gas development in federal waters and on federally protected land in California. Importantly, there have also been a number of laws that have added tools to the Commission's toolbox to better manage and regulate existing state oil and gas operations and infrastructure and protect the state from liability. Now to a brief overview of the existing offshore operations. This shows the Long Beach oil and gas operations offshore. The Wilmington field offshore Long Beach is the 4th largest oil field in North America. And through a series of statutes and agreements, the City of Long Beach is considered the operator, and California Resources Corporation, or CRC, is the city's contractor. And the state receives a significant share of the net profits generated at the Long Beach unit, which includes the 4 oil islands that you see from onshore, and the West Wilmington operations, which is primarily located under the Port of Long Beach. As this operation is not managed through a typical lessor-lessee relationship, the Commission has very limited authority over the management of those operations. That responsibility lies with the city. However, because of the history of statutes and agreements that have been entered into between the City of Long Beach, the State of California, and various operators, the state has received and continues to receive a significant share of the net profits that are generated from these operations. And with that, the state is also primarily liable for the majority of the costs associated with the plugging and abandonment of the wells associated with this operation. By statute, the state has set aside $300 million for this decommissioning program. This leaves about $500 million in unfunded liabilities based on recent estimates. The estimates to completely plug and abandon the hundreds of wells is over $800 million, and that does not include any funding set aside for the assessment and implementation of any island removal. I'm now going to share a couple of matrices and maps showing the offshore leases and for production leases and pipeline leases in state waters. So this is also going to be located on our website next week. So I know this is very small print with a lot of information, but it basically summarizes the 11 actively producing leases offshore, along with the number of wells associated with each lease, what you might understand the location or the platform associated with these leases are, and then also the bonding and liability protection measures that are managed by the Commission. It does not include the decommissioning and liability protection that CalGEM also requires of these same operations. So that's for our offshore oil and gas production leases. These are our 13 pipeline leases and these are located primarily in the Santa Barbara Channel and offshore Orange County. They are pipelines that connect both federal operations, like the 3 federal platforms offshore Orange County, to shore. They are also pipelines that connect federal platforms to shore through state waters. Again, all this will be located on our website next week, early next week. And this is just showing the Santa Barbara Channel. There are 2 active leases under our jurisdiction that we're managing now. That's what we call the West Montalvo operation, and these are offshore Ventura County. There is no, other than the wells that are directionally drilled from onshore, there's no platform or other offshore infrastructure associated with that operation. We are currently decommissioning Platform Holly. We are just about finishing up with our 9th well out of 30 there. We hope to finish the plugging and abandonment of those 30 wells by the end of this year, and then we'll move on to assessing the feasibility and environmental analysis of the decommissioning of the platform and related infrastructure itself. Also, we are actively decommissioning Rincon Island and the associated facilities with those leases. This is offshore Ventura County in the Muscle Shoals community area. We just released our draft feasibility study for the ultimate disposition of the island, the causeway, and the onshore facilities. We plugged all 75 wells and finished plugging all 75 wells last year. That feasibility study we're receiving comments now. We'll finalize it and bring it to our commission for them to identify a proposed project for decommissioning and various alternatives, and then we will commence the CEQA analysis associated with that. Let's see. So I think what's really interesting to note with the Santa Barbara Channel as it relates to state waters is that we only now have 2 actively producing leases associated with oil and gas productions in the Santa Barbara Channel. There are no actively producing state platforms, and we're going to be addressing the last remaining platform in the next couple of years with Platform Holly. The transition in Santa Barbara Channel, at least as it relates to state waters, has been significant over the past decade. But that also leaves us to what's happening offshore Orange County, where now this is where the majority of the state's operations are. We have 1 lease associated with Island Chaffee, which is to the left of your screen or in the middle. We have 1 lease associated with Platform Esther that's operated by Decor. We have 5 leases associated with Platform Emmy, which is offshore Bolsa Chica, and that's operated by California Resources Corporation. And we have 2 leases associated with Platform Eva, which is operated by Decor. We also have 2 active pipeline leases connecting federal platforms to onshore processing facilities, and 3 active pipeline leases connecting the state operations to shore. And that is the end of just the mapping and kind of the state of play as it relates to the state's offshore oil and gas production and transportation facilities. I do want to just close that the Commission does recognize the effects and challenges associated with the climate crisis, and we are dramatically changing the way that we are managing our existing oil and gas leases and also working to facilitate new energy development, including offshore wind, solar, geothermal, and other clean energy efforts. And we're really focused on both moving our leasing asset portfolio to clean energy development, but at the same time responsibly managing our existing offshore oil and gas leases. We are aware and following the efforts in the legislature right now to address the nuanced complexities of our offshore leases, and we're looking forward to working with the legislature and all of you to figure out ways that we can both manage these leases consistent with the law, but also move quickly and effectively and efficiently towards our clean energy goals. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Lucchesi. That was wonderful. Anyone who I think's ever talked to me, thank you. I think anyone that's ever spoken to me about this space has heard me sing the praises of you and the Commission on open communication, so much appreciated. And Ms. Lucchesi will also be joining our roundtable later this afternoon, so stay tuned for that. Okay, next, I believe we have Ms. Bell, but it might be a surprise to CDFW, so let's see what we got here. Ms. Bell? Oh, no. All right, never mind. Our tech team was faster than I thought and worked this in. Thank you guys so much. Mr. Potter.
Thank you. Good morning, I'm Chris Potter. I'm the Senior Environmental. Move the mic. Good morning, I'm Chris Potter. I'm a Senior Environmental Scientist with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife's Marine Region. I'm here today to talk about the Department's role in any current and future decommissioning process. One thing to note is that the Department's role will be consistent in relation to our trustee responsibility, but how the Department will engage may be different depending on a variety of factors. The Department's mission is to manage California's diverse fish, wildlife, and plant resources and the habitats upon which they depend for their ecological values and for their use and enjoyment by the public. A number of laws and regulations guide how the Department achieves this mission. The Department has authority for decommissioning under a variety of roles, including statutory authority, trustee and responsible agency status under the California Environmental Quality Act, and an advisory role to other agencies. The Department has authority under CEQA and assumes different roles and responsibilities in the CEQA process. The Department is always a trustee agency when projects may affect fish, wildlife, or their habitats. The Department may also assume the role of responsible or lead agency if proposing one of its own projects or issuing a permit for a project. The Department assumes a similar role in NEPA as it engages with federal agencies. The Department also acts in an advisory role to other agencies such as the California Coastal Commission, State Water Resources Control Board, the State Lands Commission, the National Marine Fisheries Service, BOEM, and other relevant state and federal agencies. The Marine Life Management Act, which became law in 1999, opened a new era in the management and conservation of California's marine living resources. Important to note is that the MLMA applies not only to fish and shellfish taken by commercial and recreational fishermen, but to all marine wildlife. The California Endangered Species Act is a California environmental law enacted in 1970 that conserves and protects plants and animal species at risk of extinction. CISA prohibits the take of any species of wildlife designated by the California Fish and Game Commission as endangered, threatened, or candidate species. The Department may authorize the take of any such species if certain conditions are met. It's also important to note that the Department plays an active and important role in fisheries management for both state and federally managed species. The California Department of Fish and Wildlife's Office of Spill Prevention and Response is the state's lead agency for response to oil spills in state waters, both inland and marine. OSPR's mission is to provide the best achievable protection of California's natural resources by preventing, preparing for, and responding to oil spills and enhancing affected resources. OSPR works with industry partners on oil spill contingency planning, drills, and exercises in restoration following spills. Currently, OSPR is involved with a multi-agency committee assisting with oil well abandonment in nearshore marine waters. If there's an oil spill associated with well abandonment, OSPR will respond as they do with all oil spills. The department will take on different roles and responsibilities for each decommissioning project depending on a variety of factors. Location, federal versus state waters, who are the lead agencies, and is it a state or federal process? There will likely be a CEQA process that the department will be involved in for at least for the pipelines that come to shore. Permits that may be required by the department will also dictate its involvement. For instance, if an incidental take permit is recommended for any state-listed species. The removal option pursued by the platform owner will influence the department's role and responsibility. For instance, whether full removal or some form of partial removal is pursued. It should be noted the department is not taking an advisory role at this time on what options should be pursued for decommissioning of any platform in state or federal waters. For full removal, as noted before, the department will be involved in the CEQA process as a trustee agency, advise other state and federal agencies, and provide comments on relevant CEQA and NEPA documents. The department will, of course, provide guidance to lead and responsible agencies on permitting for full removal. Should the department need to permit some facet of the decommissioning, the department will act as a responsible agency. Some of these permits could include scientific collection permits, which are specifically for research and monitoring associated with the removal and potential mitigation. While currently there are no marine state listed species associated with the platforms, the department is aware that this could change. Incidental take permits are recommended for any project that may result in the take of state-listed species and candidate species. ITPs may be issued for both a project and/or a research project. Pursuant to state law, it's unlawful to use explosives in the waters of the state inhabited by fish, except under a permit first obtained by the user from the department, consistent with the terms and conditions set forth by the Fish and Game Commission. Any person may appeal to the commission the department's decision to grant or deny a permit. As mentioned earlier by Amber and others, the Marine Life Legacy Act, which was established in 2010, authorized the concept of partial removal of platforms off the coast of California. The Act, among other things, establishes a program through which an applicant may voluntarily apply to the department to carry out partial removal of the structure. It's important to note that pursuant to the Act, the program shall be deemed consistent with and part of the California Artificial Reef Program. The department plays a key role as defined by the Act and the Fish and Game Code sections 6600 to 6621. This includes establishing an application process, accepting and reviewing applications while also determining application completeness, granting and determining conditional approval, working with the Ocean Protection Council on a net environmental benefit analysis, coordinating with the Natural Resources Agency on a CEQA analysis, and taking title of the decommissioned offshore oil structure after decommissioning and well abandonment have concluded. Key provisions of the Marine Life Legacy Act include additional agencies and actions that I will discuss here. The Ocean Protection Council would be responsible for completing a net environmental benefit analysis with guidance from the department and other agencies. The key component of this analysis is that it cannot include benefits associated with cost savings. The purpose of the analysis is to determine if a net environmental benefit compared to full removal. The State Lands Commission would verify the cost savings that would result from partial removal compared to full removal. A calculated portion of the cost savings would be deposited in an endowment for marine conservation and managed by a board prescribed in the Act. Last, the State Coastal Conservancy would create an advisory spending plan for cost savings deposited in the endowment. As I mentioned a couple slides ago, the program for partial removal must be consistent with the California Artificial Reef Program per the Marine Legacy Act. CARP, originally created in 1985, has been unfunded since 2001, and no defined source of continuous funding for the program has been identified since then. Much of the previous efforts from research, design criteria, and plan creation remains unfinished. For CARP to move forward, the department needs funding. Secondly, research such as baseline assessments of existing artificial reefs is needed, along with answering questions such as the need for artificial reefs on an ecosystem level. Finally, a scientifically sound artificial reef plan needs to be created based on this research with clearly defined goals and objectives. There's no way to tell if an artificial reef is functioning without research being done in advance and clear goals and objectives being put in place. All of this leaves the department in the position of not being able to endorse or recommend any new artificial reefs in state waters until a scientifically sound artificial reef plan has been created. There's some constraints as well. The department is constrained by 1, available funding, and 2, the laws and regulations that the department operates under. For instance, under Fish and Game Code sections 6420 through 6425, the artificial reef program is for research and placement reefs only for inducing and increasing fish, invertebrate, and kelp production. It does not cover artificial reefs designed for other uses, including reefs from decommissioned oil platforms. Additionally, it's the department's understanding that the federal government is unable to transfer title to any of the offshore platforms to the department until a statewide artificial reef plan is put in place and approved by the National Marine Fisheries Service. There are additional constraints that the department has identified. Funding. The Legacy Act establishes a process for funding to the department, but much of that funding would come after the determination of a cost savings, with the department also having an unfunded mandate for artificial reefs that needs to be finished before funding for any partial decommissioning is finalized. The department may be unable to meet deadlines for the process. Within the Legacy Act, there's language to pre-fund program startup by the operators, but it's unclear to the department how this would work. It could take a year or more to start a program or project. Timelines and timing. Additional work needs to be done to determine timelines for a net environmental benefit analysis. The application process, approvals, and the secret process as currently, these timelines may not mesh with the timelines of the oil and gas industry. With the department currently working on the CARP and the need for the artificial reef program to be finalized before any title can be handed over, timing of any partial decommissioning and the CARP need to be better established and be clear for industry. Liability, and again, as mentioned earlier, additional clarification is needed to determine the liability that will be taken on by the department and the state as a whole by taking title to a partially removed platform structure, both in state and federal waters. Under current activities, the department actively participates in the BSEE State Lands Commission-led interagency decommissioning work group. The department is actively looking at the best available science and research opportunities and partnerships with researchers, other agencies, and stakeholders as we look to gain baseline assessments towards the goal of a full statewide scientifically sound artificial reef plan. And that concludes my talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Potter. some great information and great little threads to pick up later on some of the barriers right now. Ms. Bell, I believe you are next.
Thank you. I'm Theresa Bell. I'm the Regional Supervisor, Office of Strategic Operations in the Pacific OCS region. The Pacific region for Bessie goes from the Mexican border all the way to the Canadian border and starts 3 miles offshore. So here you can see the federal platforms offshore. Here is where most of our operations are. Getting used to the little switchy thing. Yeah. So I'm a regulator, so I have to put some regulations. This is the only thing I have. You can really enjoy that. Just Google 30 CFR 250 subpart Q, and you can have all the decommissioning federal regulations. This table shows just partially of the applications that they have to go and the information they have submitted. I did not include it all, so you can go online and enjoy looking at the regulations. So instead of going through the table, which is very boring and, you know, unless you really like that stuff, then it's good. So, as I said, from Pacific region, we have 23 platforms offshore here. Out of those platforms, 8 of them are in the process of being decommissioned. They're in different stages. And you can see there's a wide water depth range. The diagram right next to the text there is a schematic of a well. That's what you're going to plug in the beginning of the decommissioning process. Right next to it is a picture of some conductors those have to be removed. It's the green long things going up and down. Those are the conductors. So once you go ahead and plug and remove the conductors, then those wells are considered completely abandoned or permanently abandoned. After you do the wells, you have to remove the top sides, and then you do some jackets. So here's some pictures that we did in a cost study. You can see here how you go ahead and remove the jacket. You have to sever the legs. So a couple times earlier, this panel and the panel before, explosives were mentioned. In general, explosives will not be used here. It's not going to be part of the projects. What they're going to do is severing is either with abrasive or mechanical. Explosives will be used if everything else fails and you really need to do a cut and you have a safety issue. So it's really not part of how we're going to be moving, at least what we're envisioning at this time. So, you know, just in case that was coming up, you know, it is possible it could happen, but it's not expected. All right, so the first group of platforms out of those 8 platforms, Point Arguello, they're up here. They're north of Point Conception off of is it Edwards Air Force Base? Did I get the wrong one? Vandenberg. I'm sorry. I'm in front of the group. The mind goes sometimes, you know. I know. I was thinking, Edwards, that's out in the desert. That's the opposite of the water. So anyways, here's the Point Arguello unit. It has 3 platforms. The first one is Hidalgo. All the 14 wells have been permanently PA'd. All the conductors have been removed. The next one is Hermosa. It is 13 wells have been totally PA'd.
Ms. Bell, can I interrupt you just for a minute to break down that acronym, just in case our audience needs to know?
Currently abandoned. With first side, I spelled it out, but I went through it fast. Sorry about that.
No worries.
Yeah. So permanently abandoned, that means it's been plugged and the conductor removed. So all the conductors have been removed, so they're complete with the wells at Hermosa. And you're going to have the same thing at Harvest. They've completed. Look at the water depth. It's one of some of the deeper ones out here. So they're done with doing the P&A and removing all the conductors at Harvest. All right, the next set is the Santa Clara unit. Offshore, you can see them from Carpinteria, Ventura. Technically, they're in Ventura County. The first one is Platform Grace. All the wells are P&A'd, and all the conductors. And they actually had, 10 conductors, if I do my math right today. They had 10 conductors, more than wells. That means those 10 were not drilled. So they were empty conductors, but you still have to remove them. All right, we have Grace. Out of this whole set of 8, Grace is the deepest one. So if they, what? Gale. Oh, it's Gale, sorry, thank you. I appreciate that. I can't see very well in this lights, I'm blinded. You know, I feel like a movie star. I should have brought sunglasses.
And I need a little help.
And I don't want to be looking down. I get confused when I'm flipping the pages. So anyways, Platform Gale is in the deepest amount of water for offshore here. And it's going to be challenging to say, because it's going to be one of the deepest platforms that are a traditional jacket platform to removed in this water depth. So it's going to be really quite a feat if it gets completely removed. So they have started the well abandonment just a couple months ago, and we expect the well abandonment to continue on. So the next set, we have Hogan and Houchin. Those are also, you can see them off of Carpinteria when you drive up. There are a whole line of platforms offshore there. They're the first 2 that are closest to shore is Hogan and Houchin. So they get to be one photograph here. I like this one. It's pretty colors. They're in this whole group. They're the shallowest platforms that are going to be removed out of this group. Right now, they're doing maintenance. There's a maintenance and monitoring going on this platform. They're replacing the cranes, fixing the cranes. Bessie had actually wrote incidents of noncompliance to the prior operator and shut in those cranes, so they are being worked on. Some of them have been brought on and working. So because of that, they're able to start addressing some corrosion, some safety issues that are on their handrails, grading, things like that. And also they did some waste removal. So that's what's currently going on there. And the wells will come in the future. And the last one on this whole list is platform habitat. So if you're going out there, depending on if you're standing on shore one way, they all look in a line, or if you look at the angle, you can see one that's standing by itself out offshore, and that one is platform habitat. Bessie actually expired the lease on this one for no production, and the operator appealed. Last year was a ruling that our expiration of that lease was upheld. So now DECOR has submitted, and they're starting their planning for going ahead and doing the abandonment of those wells. So we expect that the wells will be starting to do the decommissioning on those next year. They're in the planning phases, making sure the rig is good, everything to do the work to actually safely to go ahead and abandon those wells. So one thing that might not be, well, we can go here. The next steps. It might not be obvious to somebody when you're reading stuff that it's very, oh, this will happen this time, this time, this time. It takes time to do the wells. Our experience to do even the TAing on the wells is 2 years minimum because we have so many wells on each platform. So it takes some time to do the wells, and then it's going to be taking time to do the planning to actually removing the platforms and then going through. So the next steps are finishing doing the wells. We go ahead and Rick's going to talk about the programmatic EIS. So that's going on right now, where it's looking at the NEPA review for all the platforms that are going to be removed for programmatic. Then after that is done, we expect to get the platforms and pipelines decommissioning applications coming in after the programmatic is done. NEPA will need to be done on those individual projects, and then after that, they can be approved to be removed. And that is it. I have any questions, but that'll be after Rick.
Thank you.
I don't need that. I don't have any slides. And sorry about that. I want to say this is a nice setup. I hope you all agree. I haven't been here before. It's a beautiful setting, and congratulations to our hosts. As a panelist and as an audience member, it looks great. It's a nice system. So, unfortunately, I don't have any slides to show you on this nice system. But my story is pretty simple, so hopefully you can follow. So my name is Richard Yarde, and I work for the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. We often say sister, but I don't know why, brother or cousin or whatever.
We
sister
used to be
agents.
bonded.
Yeah. The Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement, Theresa to my left, Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, and then the revenue part are the three elements of what used to be the Minerals Management Service. So we're co-located in Ventura County, and we work closely together every day. So BOEM is responsible for leasing for offshore minerals and energy development, and for plan approval, plan with a capital P. So that's the actual written document that describes all the elements that an energy developer will carry out as they develop energy. The BOEM reviews and approves those with conditions to protect safety and the environment. So that's kind of BOEM's, in a nutshell, broad level responsibility. Once the plans are approved for offshore development, Bessie takes the wheel and has oversight over ongoing operations. So within BOEM, I'm the regional supervisor of the Office of Environment. And environment in BOEM has two major functions, and that's to do environmental analysis and to do environmental studies. And both of those are important for us here today because they both play into decommissioning fundamentally. So the environmental analysis section within my office carries out NEPA, National Environmental Policy Act review, and I think probably you all are familiar with that, so I won't go into great detail about what that means. It would expect that means, in this case, working on environmental impact statements or environmental assessments to do environmental analysis related to proposed actions of the government, and in this case, it would be Bessie's action of reviewing those decommissioning applications. Other parts of that process include consultations, like Endangered Species Act consultations, consultations under the National Historic Preservation Act, Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act, just whatever, the whole list of things. We in BOEM help Bessie with all of that work as they're considering decommissioning. The other part of our Office of Environment that I mentioned is the Environmental Sciences section. So we have a robust environmental studies program. I use the word interchangeably, studies and sciences, so forgive me, I'll switch back and forth. Our program is essentially one of funding other entities to carry out science for the agencies, and that science is targeted. It's applied science, meaning we don't just do science for science sake like many people do, and that's okay. That's a good thing to do, but that's not our responsibility. We need to do science that informs the decisions of the agencies exclusively. That's what we do. Our environmental sciences program, I called it robust because we do invest a lot into that. We have normally in the 20-ish range of studies going on at once, because they do take from 3 to 5 years. It's a normal time span to do a study. We start new ones every year, and that's usually, again, in the 4, 5, 6, 7 range of new studies. Normally, the economic investment per year is in the double-digit millions on those studies. And about 10 years ago, when I started, I guess it's been 11 now, with BOEM, those studies were predominantly focused on the oil and gas infrastructure that the agencies are working on around here. As BOEM got added responsibility for renewable energy under the Energy Policy Act of 2005, as you might imagine, the investment that we make in our studies program shifted dramatically towards that emerging area of renewable energy development in the offshore environment. So again, compared to a decade ago where we were almost exclusively funding science that related to oil and gas, we now routinely are spending about 3/4 or more of our studies budget on renewable energy development. But I will say that some of our studies, quite a number of them actually, are agnostic with regard to technologies. They involve issues about work in the marine environment that could be applied to either one, either conventional energy or renewable energy. We have heard already today quite a bit about some of these studies. The earlier panel with our professors talked about some of the BOEM-funded studies that they have worked on themselves. And with regard to decommissioning, these span, we do a lot of work regarding the structures as habitat, which is, as you have heard and as you are aware, very important when we're talking about decommissioning. You heard about the sea lions study, sea lions and seals, but mostly sea lions that use the structures. This was something that before that study was completed a few years ago, there wasn't much known in a scientific way about the use by marine mammals of the structures, and we do now have quite a lot of data. That study with NOAA involved actual photography, taking thousands and thousands of pictures on a number of structures in the offshore environment to get a sense of how many marine mammals are using those structures for haul out. And the answer is a lot. There's always marine mammals at the base of those platforms. So you also heard earlier about the shell mounds at the base of the platforms on the sea floor. This is an important issue for many people. It was mentioned at that time that these are probably potentially habitat for a lot of creatures. There's also been the question about what sorts of contaminants could be held in those mounds. So we have done and we continue to try to do a lot of research on those. Just a couple of examples of our studies program. I will say, again, sorry about not having a slide with this information on it, but it's very easy. If you would like to learn more about our studies program, please look at our website. It's pretty easy to follow the logic tree through the website towards our environment page with the analysis section and the studies section. And I will also point out specifically here today for your information, if you don't already know this, we always publish targeted sheets that talk about the current state of our studies program by topic area. So decommissioning is one. So you will see selected studies informing decommissioning processes on our website. And that has a list of some highlighted, recently completed and otherwise important and ongoing studies that inform the decision-making process with regard to decommissioning. And with that, I'm done. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you all. Some great information, and we still have 20 minutes left for questions. So awesome. My first question is for Ms. Crowe. From a tribal perspective, what is the most impactful role that tribal governments can play in the decommissioning process, and how can both state and federal agencies support that?
Well, obviously in a perfect world, we wouldn't have been so reliant on oil in the first place and have these platforms. But talking about the decommissioning process, it's just something to think about that I think that tribal engagement should be sought early and often for these. I feel like a lot of times when it comes from the state level, it kind of trickles down to different organizations that are working on different things. And it should be kind of a standard for these different agencies to have tribal liaisons to talk with them and have kind of a discussion before it actually even goes to public comment on different things that are happening. I feel like a lot of times there's been so many things that have happened in this state that I feel like have virtually been ignored in history of the state. And I feel like now is a time to open up those conversations and actually have community partnerships created with these different agencies, so that it's not just we're checking the box at the end of a project and we need it just so we can make sure that the state knows that we involve these different tribes. I feel like it has to be something that starts in the process, and even to the extent of explaining what, basically brick by brick, what's happening in this process. Because I think a lot of times, I think even the general public doesn't know the ins and outs of what happens. And even discussing and talking about, if we remove the top part of the platform, what happens to the rest of the environment that happens underneath that. And so for us, we think of all the different organisms that live in the ocean. Those are all our relatives, and thinking about how do we go and respect them in the process that has happened as well, because there's been so much hurt that how can we, decrease the damage that happens after that point too. And so just tribal engagement early and often, and making partnerships and having reciprocity, because we're getting involved in giving knowledge, insight, and so we want that to be continuing, lasting relationship in the process.
Thank you so much. And speaking of early, let's talk about timing a little bit. So as my colleague Clara mentioned, we gathered some questions in advance, and it seems like in the governance topic, two really frequently asked issues were both timing and cost. So we'll take them each in turn. First, for timing, in terms of triggering the decommissioning process, I was so grateful, Ms. Bell, that you mentioned the IBLA ruling on the decor case for platform habitat, and Ms. Lucchesi, that you mentioned the production and paying quantities trigger as the expiration of a lease, which would then trigger the decommissioning process. So my question is, what oversight programs or audits or something of the sort do state and federal agencies have to ensure that production is still occurring in paying quantities such that the leases remain effective, such that decommissioning does not yet need to begin?
You want to start?
I can start with
Okay.
the state perspective. So with the state leases, the term is not fixed by a number of years. It's an economic term. And between the state statute that set that framework up and then the lease contracts themselves and the language within those contracts, it really is up to the lessee or the operator to determine the economic life of their operation. We do a number of different audits and compliance and enforcement efforts as it relates to our entire lease oversight, and that's from an oil spill prevention perspective between inspections on a monthly basis and a comprehensive safety audit of the platforms and all the infrastructure associated with that every 5 years. We also do financial audits to ensure that the state's receiving the appropriate compensation pursuant to the contractual terms for the production of oil and gas. We are constantly monitoring the amount that's being produced from each of these operations as well. However, it stops short at that. We do not have the ability to audit or otherwise look under the hood of the operators to determine from their perspective if the continuing production is economic from their perspective. There's a lot of different factors that come into that from an operations perspective. Obviously, the price of oil plays a huge role in the economics for them. That coupled with the available technologies, meaning how much they can actually extract from the reservoir, also with the costs that they have for lifting the oil, so their lift costs. And each operator, each platform, each operation is very different. There's certain state operations where we understand the lift cost to be $20 a barrel, and there's others that are upwards of $60 a barrel or more. So when you're looking at the price of oil, even when we were down to $30 a barrel or less, you had some operators still making money. It's and a lot of that detail and information is protected as proprietary from as it relates to the operator's financial books. So when we're looking at life of the field out there, we're looking at what our own files have, and we have our reservoir engineers constantly evaluating that. We compare that with what some of our operators are filing at the federal level with the Securities and Exchange Commission, and we're also factoring in the price of oil and coming up with essentially guesstimates. But I will say that the Long Beach operations, the 4 oil islands offshore Long Beach, those were anticipated, estimated to be completely done in the late 90s, early 2000s, and they're still producing. And so it's very hard to guess how long these reservoirs, these fields will be operating.
Actually, you sort of answered at the end. It really is hard to guess how long it's going to operate because you think it's going to last this long, and then the price of oil changes, and you ended up like right now with this price of oil, something that was economic is suddenly very economic. So it's really hard to predict on how long something's going to be out there. When they cease production, that's when the clock starts ticking on the different regulations. So it does say on one of the lease stipulations to remove, you got to bring it back to original basically within 1 year. That's not practical because if something happens where they were going along and like we have up north where you had a pipeline and suddenly they couldn't deliver their oil, like Veneco went bankrupt because of that reason. It stopped then, and that's when the clock starts, is when that stopped, and you couldn't prepare ahead of time of starting the decommissioning of the wells. So it's really ends up to be a longer time frame, 3 to 10 years, not 3, but 5 to 10 years is what we sort of expect at the long run. 5 is being optimistic.
Thank you so much. And earlier you mentioned the programmatic EIS that the federal government is currently working on. Do we have any anticipated time frame for when that will be released?
We do. I didn't talk much about it in the introduction because I knew we'd get to it with questions. So at Bessie's request about a year ago, we did initiate a programmatic EIS on decommissioning for the federal facilities in the Pacific. A programmatic EIS is a planning tool, and it's done in this case and in many cases, before you have a particular action, but it's an opportunity to do some early work to, provide a large scope of decommissioning activities that might take place in the future and houses a lot of sort of high-level analyses. But as Theresa mentioned, as they get decommissioning applications to consider for specific facilities, at that point there will be another review. We'll take the programmatic EIS and we will tier from that and do site-specific analyses with more specific information. So that's the process that we kicked off about a year ago with the programmatic. At the time we kicked it off, we had slightly different NEPA rules in play. We were trying to be done in about a year. I think we're going to end up taking a little longer than that. We have been targeting publishing. We've gone through scoping, so I think many of you probably saw that process. We're targeting publishing a draft EIS in late spring, recognizing that's not far away. So we're still trying to hit that. That's just within the next couple months. And overall, our goal is to be done with the programmatic EIS by around the end of this year.
Okay, thank you. One quick follow-up on that. Do you have a feel or can you share what scope of alternatives will be analyzed for each platform in the PIS?
Sure. Programmatically, again, because they're a broad document, the way that we proposed in our notice of intent to initiate that EIS, the proposed action in the alternatives was essentially following the Bessie regulations, which is you always have a no action in NEPA. That's basically the baseline, assuming nothing happens. But the proposed action then would be decommissioning as per the Bessie regulations which says complete removal and returning to its natural state. So everything is removed and there's a clearing of the seafloor, and it's supposed to look like nothing ever happened. So that's the proposed action, again, as per BSEE regulations. But we anticipated, and then through the scoping process understood that there's a lot of interest in variations on that that could include some types of partial removal of structures and or reefing of structures. So we're including that in the analysis to provide the basic information about potential environmental impacts from those types of activities now. But again, it will be when a decommissioning application comes in from one of the decommissioning agents that we actually have a specific sort of action to analyze. So there's no way to know right now what methods they're going to propose when we get an actual application. But the programmatic is supposed to be broad and cover those kind of that spectrum of possibilities from complete removal to something other than complete.
Great, thank you. And Ms. Lucchesi, for that spectrum of possibilities, for the state platforms that might be in shallower water and currently ineligible for reefing under AB 2503, what scope of possibilities is state lands commissioning for decommissioning? Is toppling being considered or anything besides full removal?
Certainly. So we are very similar to the feds, as Rick was just explaining. Both in CEQA, we are required to analyze a no project alternative. We also, in accordance with our lease terms, the commission has the discretion and the authority to dictate the level of removal. And the lease terms itself talk about restoration of the lease premises back to its natural state. So the full spectrum of keeping the entire platform or the island in place and the associated infrastructure all the way to complete removal is on the board and what we will be looking at. Our plan, at least as it relates to the Rincon Island facilities and Platform Holly, because this is a state project, as opposed to we don't have an active applicant applying to us with their own proposal. We are conducting feasibility studies first to assess what the feasibility is technically, environmentally, financially, and then that will help formulate the different options that we'll analyze under CEQA. So for Rincon Island, as I mentioned earlier, we're in the process. We just issued a draft feasibility study for that infrastructure offshore. We hope to finalize that study after receiving and incorporating public comments in the next couple of months, and then we'll take it to our commission for their direction on what proposed project and alternatives we'll analyze under CEQA. We plan to take a similar approach with Platform Holly later this year.
Okay, thank you. Now let's turn to costs a little bit. So there was a 2020 decommissioning cost update prepared for BSEE, which estimated the cost of decommissioning Southern California's 23 federal platforms and associated wells and facilities at $1.63 billion. And Ms. Lucchesi, I understand, correct these numbers if they're wrong, but Platform Holly's total costs are expected at around $482.5 million, allocated in numerous ways. So can y'all break down a little bit from both the federal and the state side how decommissioning costs are allocated between current owners, operators, prior owners, operators, and taxpayers?
So our regulations are quite clear, is basically the current operator and owners are responsible for decommissioning the platforms. So as part of that, there's financial assurance. BSEE puts together some costs. We went ahead for the 2020 cost study. We contracted it out to use the best available information that they can get a hold of and use. We didn't at that time really have any actual costs to do well work and stuff. It's required for the operators to go ahead and submit the actual costs to us after they complete the work. So we're starting to get the actual cost dollar amounts for the wells. So that will go into our next study, our next numbers when that comes out in 5 years. So after we finish our cost analysis, we give it over to BOEM, And BOEM has a financial assurance group that looks at it and looks at the companies and how much bonding, how much money they have to put up, and that's what happens. If you have an operator that goes bankrupt, like Vinico did, what happens, it automatically, we go back to the predecessors and we look at the prior predecessors on what the financial liabilities are. That is not going to be covered. So it just goes back. So like right now, Chevron is decommissioning Gale and Grace. And the bonding that we had available for the part that they were not liable for, we had bonding in place, and that money was given to Chevron to complete that well work that Vinico had done. So the new well work, that was solely Vinico's. So that's what's happening with that, with the bankruptcy. So, and it's so far working out well for our region, and we hope it continues that way.
So similar to what Theresa was just saying, that's parallel with the state's approach. The current operator, lessee, is 100% responsible for the plugging and abandoning of all the wells and the decommissioning of all the infrastructure, including the platform. You do get into a different scenario where there has been a bankruptcy that's been filed. So just a couple of different examples of that, and then I'll talk about where it's going to ideally work out well in terms of the current operator and the prior operator. So Platform Holly, specifically, as Theresa mentioned, Vinico filed for bankruptcy, and for the state, what they did actually just prior to filing for bankruptcy is they submitted their quitclaims, their lease quitclaims. So they gave the state back the quitclaim or the leases. And by operation of law, that we are required to accept it, essentially. They are relieved of their lease once they file that quitclaim with us. They are not relieved of their lease obligations to plug and abandon and decommission the facilities. So as they draft into bankruptcy, we and continue to fight the trustee in bankruptcy court in Delaware to this day to ensure that the state gets at least some of the estate assets and money as part of that bankruptcy filing. It's very complicated, and it's not the federal bankruptcy law, as some of you may know, really does not work in favor of the state or the federal government in this type of situation. So we are already in a much worse position because of that. We also had bonds associated with Platform Holly, but not nearly enough. Fortunately, when our commission approved the assignment from ExxonMobil of these lease facilities, of the leases to Vinico, it kept Exxon on the hook for a majority of the decommissioning costs, but not all. And as part of a settlement of legal disputes with Exxon, Exxon is paying for the majority of the plugging and abandonment and 100% of the decommissioning or ultimate disposition of the platform and infrastructure. The state is bearing some of the costs associated with operation and maintenance of the facilities, including Platform Holly and the Elwood onshore facility, and then Piers 421. We called on the bond, and we're using the bond proceeds to help fund some of that. We are also responsible for a portion of the plugging and abandonment of 7 wells because of some changes that Vinico had done to those wells after Exxon sold their interest to Vinico. Rincon Island is a different situation. The company that took over the Rincon operation actually bought those lease assets in bankruptcy. And so the commission didn't have any approval authority over that transfer of operations. This happened all in the federal bankruptcy court with no input or influence from the state. And so when that company dropped into bankruptcy, there's no predecessor to go after. And so the state is bearing 100% of the costs associated with the Rincon Rincon facilities. So we have spent over $50 million in the plugging and abandonment of those wells, and we will be seeking additional state funding based on the decommissioning decision that our commission makes with regards to the island and the causeway and other infrastructure. Comparing all of that to down here in Orange County with the state platforms, the two that DECOR operates and the one that CRC operates, the business deal between Freeport-McMoRan and DECOR when Freeport-McMoRan sold the leases to DECOR keeps Freeport-McMoRan on the hook, both through the condition of assignment that our commission approved and their own business deal. So Freeport-McMoRan actually has the responsibility for decommissioning the platforms themselves. DECOR retains the responsibility for the plugging and abandonment of the wells. So this is all very case by case. For Platform Emmy, we learned very quickly after our experience with Platform Holly and Rincon, and we renegotiated the state's liability protection for Platform Holly with CRC. So we're not just solely relying on bonds, because the bonding market can be very uncertain as well. And so we've also negotiated a priority lien on some upland properties that CRC owns, as well as a sinking fund, and requiring them to plug idle wells ahead of regulatory requirements. The priority lien on their upland property helps position us as a state in the event that they drop into bankruptcy. We become a priority creditor in the bankruptcy system, which puts us at a much better position than where we are at with the platform, with Beneco's bankruptcy now. So needless to say, it depends on the history of the business deal and the approvals as those lease assignments occurred, but it's also really on a case-by-case basis for the in terms of the bonding and liability protection we're able to negotiate with the lessees and the operator's own financial health and the future of their financial health.
Thank you so much. That's all the time we have. Some great information. Please help me in thanking our panelists for their participation.